Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. So for today's video, I brought my sister along, and so we are going to be talking about colorism, which with everything going on right now, I felt was a perfect time to talk about this. So without further ado, let's get started.
Alright guys, so before we get started, I thought it'd be good to define what colorism is. So it's defined as prejudice or discrimination against individuals with a dark skin tone, typically among people of the same ethnic or racial group. And I think it's really interesting that they included the typically among people with the same ethnic or racial group, considering within our own culture, colorism is a huge issue.
Which I think is so interesting, because now that I hear that, it makes so much sense with what I'm going to be talking about later on, and all the circumstances that have come up with both of our experiences, at least. So yeah, so basically growing up, I used to always be darker growing up just because I spent more time outside in the sun. So why would this matter? Well, growing up, it was a big deal of getting darker. So I always heard the phrase, oh, you should stay out of the sun, or don't get darker, or you should come and sit in the shade for a little while. We wouldn't want your skin to get too dark. Whether it's with my mom, whether it's with aunts, it was just a saying that in Indian households,
everybody says it.
It was just basically a thing of you shouldn't get too dark, which I never really understood why, because to me, I was playing outside, I was having fun and enjoying company. So it made no sense to me. But as I started growing older, it was those smaller nuances that really bugged me, because I couldn't really control the color of my skin, especially during the summertime. I could go out for an hour in good sun and come back 5 shades darker. And that's not even with me trying to tan, where I know a lot of people are oh, I'd love to have your genetics for tanning, but I'm for me, it was just super frustrating, because people would just, in my culture, in Indian culture at least, and in my circle, it would always be oh, you're getting too dark, you should come sit in the shade. And so it was conflicting for me at first, but then I kind of just started growing a thicker skin to that, which isn't always the case for other girls and for other people. I mean, did you have any situations like that growing up?
I don't think I really had a lot of, we all heard the don't stay in the sun because you're gonna get dark. I never really had that stop me, because we grew up we grew up in Dubai, so beaches were basically what we did every weekend was we spent time at the beach. So it was no way that I was not going to get darker. We always got darker, but we never really stopped that from that didn't stop us from going to do things, and we never made that a big thing in our lives. But Hannah was actually just showing me a video of a young girl. I think she was as young as 6 years old, and someone had asked her oh, do you feel beautiful? And she was no, I'm dark. And I'm to me, that is so devastating that as early as 6 years old, we're telling children and girls you need to be light enough so you can get married. She was essentially saying that she was not going to get married because she was too dark. And sadly, in Indian culture, this is such a reality that a lot of women face. And Hannah's gonna touch on.
And I think it was also just the fact that it's not always a blatant thing that people are oh, you're dark, so you're not gonna get married. But it's that nuanced innuendo of oh, if this happens, look at so-and-so, they're not married and they're dark. And so then at the end of the day, it's you're not directly saying it, but what are you indirectly,
insinuating?
Yeah, and what are you trying to tell children? And when I first saw that video, I was heartbroken, because growing up, I was the same color as that little girl. I was the type of girl who'd always be outside, and so it sucked, because I didn't realize the effects of it until later, when I was a teenager, and I was, looking into dating and all of that stuff. And I remember taking a stance on my parents being yeah, no, I'm not gonna marry in the Indian culture, because I really want to deal with this, and I don't want this situation to be a thing.
Yeah, and like Fair and Lovely ads and that whole brand. I remember growing up actually and using it. Like when we go to India, and we'd be like, yeah, you should use this cream. It's gonna make your skin really light and you'll look fair. And this has been, that cream and that brand has been something that's been part of, I think, like years, maybe even decades. I would go as far as to saying decades, where even growing up, like part of your facial would be, do you want your skin bleached? Like that was
Which is absurd that even happens.
Yeah.
Like I remember growing up, and at first I didn't really think anything of it, but like,
well, we didn't know any better,
yeah,
is what it was. We didn't know any better, nobody had talked to us about it, and so, yeah, using the Fair and Lovely, like I've used the Fair and Lovely creams,
stuff,
yeah, and has that really made a difference in my skin tone? I mean, they claim that you go like up to 5 shades lighter, and I know recently, I think Dove is, Unilever and Dove are part of that brand, and they've gone on to say, like, possibly taking them off of their roster of products. But it's important that we stop kind of pushing this propaganda of like, you know, lighter skin for brown people is needed, and like you need that to get married. Like that's not what your marriage should be all about. And if that's what somebody's looking for, well, I mean, that's very shallow, so.
Well, I think the more absurd part is that the fact that, like you said, this is a factor that is being even considered in marriage proposals and stuff like that in India, and I can only speak for Indian culture because I'm Indian, but like I don't know about other cultures, but for our culture at least, like if you go on like indianmatchmaker.com or whatever, like
Shadi.com
or whatever, yeah, whatever. But basically, like, I mean, there's the new Netflix series too of
Indian matchmaking?
Yeah, which the show is kind of funny, but the sad part is it shows the reality that even to date, because that was filmed last year, so we're not going far back into history, we're literally going like
last
12 months ago type thing, and the fact that even in those kind of situations, color is considered like, oh, we want our brides to be lighter in color. I mean, there was a point in time where it was like, oh, people describe their color as like wheatish, which blows my mind. That it's like, I want to be like wheatish color. It's like, I want to be like the wall. Like, what? It makes no sense.
So if you go on like any of the matrimonial websites, Shadi.com and things, like they ask you what your skin color is, and wheatish is one of the options. That's what
none, yeah. It's none, yeah. None, yeah. Repeat after me. It is none, yeah.
And even on like the Indian matchmaking show that Hannah was referencing, one of the main, I guess, phrases you would hear on the show is slim, trim, and fair.
Oh my.
And it's
like, yo, that is a whole nother video. We will get into size comments in another video because that is a huge thing that I grew up irritated by, but we're not gonna jump in on it. But yes, like the fact that this is still a thing and that still goes on is absolutely mind-blowing, and I think there needs to be conversations by it. And the reason I say that is because, you know, many of you guys may not be Indian, many of you guys may come from various other cultures, but that doesn't mean that you guys don't have, like, this doesn't affect you or this doesn't relate to you, because like even white families, if you will, like this conversation still matters to you guys because you're going to interact with people that one day will make comments, and it can be as something as like, oh, well, you know, maybe you should sit in the shade a little bit, or you might be like, oh, you might want to wear more layers, or why don't you take an umbrella for a walk? Like, sounds absurd, but I've actually had people walk around with umbrellas, not for the sake of like protecting themselves from UV rays and all of that stuff. It's literally for the fact that they don't want to get darker. And
yeah, and we should probably preface that too, like, you know,
yes,
with our family, like we're talking about our family because that's what we have as reference. And we've asked like our parents, like, well, why don't you want us to sit in the sun? And we're like, is it because of like, you know, skincare and sun damage and things? They're like, No, because that's not the, that's not the
They weren't
point
raised
of
with
it.
that mentality of it. Not that it was like a bad thing. Like they obviously like
No.
take care of themselves and skincare and all of that, but it was
But I guess
never
what
really
we're trying
that
to say is that, the reason that they're saying that you shouldn't sit in the sun is not because of they're worried about your skin and like skin cancer and all those things.
Yeah.
Like that's not what they were referring to. It's more so that you're gonna get dark. So
Yeah, and like that, those types of comments really do affect people. Like it doesn't even have to be a child. It can be an adult. Like I've grown to have a thick skin because I grew up being on the darker side, if you will. And so that sounds so weird saying, but like, yeah, like I grew up having darker skin. So for me, like I grew a thick skin to people's, in my opinion, really, really, really dumb comments. And that's not the case for everybody. Like there are adults even that are like, oh, well, I don't wanna like get darker. I don't feel comfortable in my own skin. And it's about that community of like, we're telling women don't do this and don't do that. And this is not good and this is not all right. When it's like, we should be focusing on what characteristics, what attributes are you bringing to the table. Let's focus on you and your personality and who you are on the inside, because at the end of the day, color is something that we'll never be able to control.
and this is goes for men and women.
Absolutely.
I know we're talking about women because we are women ourselves.
Yeah.
But men go through this as well, especially in the Indian community. It's not based on gender. It's literally based on just all across the board. Colorism is a thing, and it doesn't just stop when you get married. It's like when you get pregnant. It's like, oh, you know what? Here are some foods that you can eat in order to have fair babies. Now, if you know anything about genetics, I don't know that eating certain food groups is really gonna make that much of a difference on what color your skin is or your child's skin is.
Yeah.
I think it's just genetics.
I mean, if there's some science behind it, like,
Maybe
if
you know that there's
tag me in some of it. Like, tag me in it.
Yeah, let us know because we would love to learn because
Yeah.
this is a growing and learning experience for everyone. But I know like my kids, for instance, they're like 10 shades lighter than I am probably. And I know people always commented, and I still get comments when I take them out. They're like, wow, your kids are really fair. And I'm like, oh yeah, like it's, I mean, a lot of people are not coming to, like, they're not saying that to be rude or malicious.
Yeah.
It's just, as a person, like, I don't really know how to respond to that. Like, what do you say to them? Oh, your kids are really fair. Thanks.
You have eyes. Congratulations.
Yeah, it's like okay, that's great. And like, I don't really see them as like fair-skinned or even like, my
They're kids.
yeah,
They're kids.
At the end of the day, like, I would prefer compliments on their attributes, like, oh, your daughter is so caring, she's so loving, she's so kind. Like, those are things that I would appreciate more, or even I could have a response to, rather than like, oh, your kids are so fair. It's like, I don't know how to respond to it, and so it's really awkward at times.
It's kind of like saying the sky is blue. And it's like,
That's nice.
oh, yes.
Like, the whole point is that, it doesn't just end when you get married. Then it's like, oh, your children, and it's like, oh, you're pregnant. Okay, well, eat such and such and such. And it's like, oh, do such and such.
Yeah.
It's like, no, like, it needs to stop. Like, we need to stop kind of putting these and passing these on to generations, because they don't need to be focused on the color of their skin. Let them be kids. Let them just run around, play, enjoy, put sunscreen on, wear your hats, drink water, get hydrated, and enjoy the sunshine. Because it shouldn't be about like, oh, you can only play out for like 5 minutes and then you're coming back in because you're gonna get dark.
Again, reminder, this is not considering like skincare, sun damage, all of that stuff.
I mean,
we're strictly talking about comments that we have experienced and seen, like, and this may sound absurd, like some of this stuff may sound absurd to some of you guys being like, that didn't happen, and it's like, it did. And we're telling you this because it happened specifically to us growing up, and it's happened literally over the past few years too, so we want to share that with you guys. But yeah, I mean, I don't like ending videos in the sense of like, well, here is like all of the things that everyone needs to work on, but like, how can we actually like work on bettering each other? Number one, I would highly, highly, highly recommend, first off, like if you hear comments, nip them in the bud, but do it respectfully and do it from a place of caring, because even our parents, even our grandparents, our aunties, our uncles, our X, Y, and Z, people are not always aware. Yes, it's 2020, I get it. I get that people can be cracking a book open or look at the internet and search it up themselves. But some people may not have the time, may not have the resources, X, Y, and Z. You don't know their story, and just like they don't know your story, it's up to you to educate them on it.
Yeah.
And do so in kind ways.
Love. Yeah.
Yeah, like I had a conversation with someone in my life about colorism and the fact that they had made a comment, and I was like, well, why is it that you say this? And okay, well, probe their questions more so, because then they're going to understand, oh, okay, well, yeah, that doesn't really make sense. And that's a kind of way to get them to be like, ah, that makes more sense. Yeah. And number two, I think we should stop focusing on complimenting on colors, tanning abilities, tanning, like there's nothing wrong with it, but I think if we focus more on attributes, and like, I'm gonna go as far as even saying like physical appearances, like let's not even bring that into the topic. I know this video isn't about this. We'll maybe talk about it on another, yeah, that's another day, but yeah, start complimenting people on their attributes, their personality, their characteristics. Like there's so many things to compliment someone on. The color of their skin doesn't need to be one of them. Yeah, I want to encourage everyone, please let's start having open discussions. And
you guys in your own home and your own sphere of influence, you guys have the ability to make change happen in your own homes. Like you don't have to like have a YouTube channel. You don't have to like have a certain amount of followers on Instagram or anything. Like you can have those conversations right in your house. Like when you're sitting outside in the sun, you hear someone say like, hey, maybe you should come sit in the shade. It's like, that's a great opportunity for you to ask questions, maybe, you know, probe them like Hannah said, and have those conversations, those difficult conversations that can be tough, but honestly, at the end of the day, we have to be the ones that break this stereotype and the stigma, and we need to, like, it starts with us.
We need to be better, yeah. And as much as I can say, like, we all need to do this, I say that to myself as well. Like, well before I started this channel and like all of this stuff, like I would try and have conversations with people, like even in grocery stores. Like, sounds weird, but yeah, it can happen in a grocery store lineup. It can happen literally anywhere. So just try and be more mindful of the conversations that you're having. Think about the things that you're even saying and maybe why you're saying them. And you know, I had a lot of self-actualization and growing up to do on my end as well, to correct conversations that I've done, and even doing apologizing to people because, you know, I was in the wrong, but realizing that me apologizing doesn't mean that I am less than, or I messed up big time and I'm like a huge failure. It's like, no, I'm recognizing that I need to make change and I want to be part of that change. All right, guys, thank you so much for joining me on today's video. I hope you guys enjoyed it and learned something. If you guys have had any similar situations or, you know, anything that you've learned from today's video, drop it down in the comments below. And don't forget to hit subscribe. You can follow Sharon along on her Instagram. I'll leave it in the description below. And you can follow me along on Instagram as well. And I'll see you guys in next time's video. Bye!